Okay, everybody, come on in. It is my enormous pleasure as we come to the 4th of July to be with my friend Colette Holt. Colette is a brilliant lawyer. She is the most thoughtful and experienced person in the country when it comes to um, designing, running, defending, programs that make government funded business opportunities actually available to people who live in the communities that get taxed for those services. We grew up together. Colette was the most brilliant kid I knew. She didn't finish high school with me because Yale couldn't wait to take her, so she went early. Then she went to law school and dusted her classmates, people like James Comey and Amy Klobuchar couldn't keep up with her then either. So I feel a little better about not having been able to keep up with her as a kid. Anyway, Colette, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Edwin. I'm always delighted to talk with you, and however else I may feel, you always make me feel better.
All right, well, let's talk about it. It is, the 4th of July, and we celebrate not the birth of the country, but the Declaration of Independence. And the only thing Americans remember about the Declaration is that part that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal. That is the thing that Americans supposedly celebrate on this holiday. But our government seems to be wanting to erase that part of our history. And you're in the middle of that. So talk a little about what you're discovering.
Well, as you mentioned at the top, I work on programs to ensure that everyone has a full and fair opportunity to compete.
Yep.
And compete is critical for government contracts as well as private sector contracts because, frankly, they're more profitable anyway. So, and what we've been seeing really over the last 3 to 4 years is essentially the evisceration of decades old civil rights programs designed to ensure that minority and woman-owned businesses can get in the game and ensure that there's a level playing field. This was actually happening when Biden was president. And of course, the Trump administration has just accelerated this at warp speed. So what we're seeing is federal programs being essentially dismantled. And even at the state and local level, in large part in response to threats from the Trump administration to potentially put elected officials and administrators in jail if they operate programs. So what we're seeing is people just retrenching and going to small business programs. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I did look up the statistics for Illinois and Texas. And now I live in Texas, so that's a whole nother thing. And 99.6% of the firms in the state of Illinois will qualify as small. And it's 99.8 in Texas. So essentially, the vast, vast, vast majority of firms in the economy are small. I think people don't really have a sense of how big the economy is. And so, yes, small business programs are better than nothing, but not a whole lot better. There's an old grandma saying that when white America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia.
Mm-hmm.
And so to the extent that these programs have been reasonably successful in ensuring that people can get in the game and compete for work, I think what we're going to see is a vastly less amount of participation by minority businesses, women businesses, and especially Black-owned businesses.
Before we get to the specifics on the way programs have been cut and what you see both in the courts and in the executive branch, let's back up, because the rhetoric has been from John Roberts through the economy. The rhetoric has been America has made enough progress on race. We no longer need to have remedies. We just need people to compete, and everybody's equal, and everybody should compete equally. That remains a fiction, but to talk about that a little bit, because people, when the economy gets tight, people are saying, "Oh, well, I mean, every time I see a white person not get a job, they're told you can't get the job because we're hiring somebody Black." It's invariably not true. It's not true that that's not why they didn't get the job, and it's not true that they hired somebody Black.
Neither is true.
Neither is true. But that's what they tell the person who's not getting the job, and that does not help.
Yeah, no, I think that is very true. I think the federal courts are living in some kind of racial fantasy world, where all problems have been solved, and at least structural problems, and now it's just about bad people, bad apples theory. And if we can just get rid of the bad people, then everything will be fine. Well, this is nonsense. Especially the experiences of the descendants of chattel slaves know that the structures that have been in place in this country for a very long time didn't just miraculously disappear. One of the things I always want to ask them was, well, okay, if the problem got fixed, can you tell me when that happened? Because I missed the memo. And I have worked on probably 100 statistical and anecdotal studies of minority and women businesses all across the country, with all kinds of organizations, federally funded contracts, federal agencies, states, local agencies. And what we see everywhere is that without some type of affirmative intervention in a marketplace that still is infected with the continuing effects of discrimination, what you will get is basically all the dollars going to very large firms and firms owned by white males. And one of the most aggravating and frustrating things about having these conversations with people is that you want more competition for your work. If you're the city of Chicago, you don't want the same 5 guys passing around the contracts all the time. It doesn't serve the public. It doesn't serve the taxpayers. And so this idea that somehow this all got fixed and now, it's all good. I just don't know where they live. To point to a specific case, Justice Roberts' opinion in Shelby versus Holder, which was a Voting Rights Act case, not a minority business case. But he starts out by saying, this country has changed. And the first time I read it, I thought, not so much, Justice Roberts, and certainly not as much as you think it has. And so I think that part of the narrative is to keep people from looking at structural barriers to the success of everyone. If the agency doesn't publish solicitations, if you don't know how to get to people who make decisions, if the insurance requirements are crazy, well, that's going to keep almost everybody out. And so if everyone is yelling at each other at this level and they're not looking up to see who is really benefiting from telling essentially whites that Black people and brown people are your problem. And I think that's part of what is so frustrating, is simply that these conversations, like you just described, keep people from looking at the real problems so that the system continues to lock people out.
Shelby versus Holder, that's the case where Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, you don't know it's raining because you have an umbrella, right? And they took away the umbrella.
Remove the pre-clearance requirement.
Right. And the moment they removed those pre-clearance requirements, you learned why we needed them, because there was a rush to create maps that up until 2 weeks ago were illegal, right? Illegal and discriminatory. But they didn't learn their lesson. They saw that rush and they said, yeah, that's what we want. So we doubled down on it. I think John Roberts has not come across as an honest broker here.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. This nonsense that all I do is call balls and strikes. Well, I thought it was nonsense when he said it at his confirmation hearings. I mean, I clerked for a federal court of appeals judge, and the values that judges bring to deciding cases is important, especially close questions. The easy cases don't make it to the Supreme Court. They don't even make it to the circuit court. It's the hard cases. And that's where it's important to know what people's worldviews are and what they value. And the court is posturing as some kind of neutral arbiter out here. And I just don't think you can read the opinions, especially not in the last couple of weeks at the end of the term, as anything other, to be blunt about it, than sort of rank partisanship. There's a view that they have of the way this country should run and who should be in charge of it. And they are imposing that on us. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Federal judges live a long time. My judge died at 95 on a Monday, and he was set to hear routine cases that Friday. I mean, it's a great gig, right? I mean, who would give it up? So I think we have a problem.
Yeah, we have some problems with that. All right, so talk about some of the things you've seen, some of the executive orders that have come out of the administration, and then let's talk about that, and then we'll go to DOJ, which is truly heartbreaking.
I know. I'm some days I'm ashamed to be a lawyer, and that is really saying
Well,
something.
let me stop before you go on about that. Lawyers have done, and some judges have done phenomenal work in slowing down this autocratic nonsense, so to give Americans a chance to catch up and do what we can do.
Yes.
I think the lawyers may actually be part of saving us. So.
Well, that's good to hear, because I have some days I look at my fellow barristers and think, oh my heavens, what on earth has
Well, there
has
are
happened?
crooked ones for sure, but
yes, well, there are people like Mark Elias, and there's some wonderful people out here doing the work, and we try to support them. I try to be a little part of that, if only because my father, who Edwin knew very, very well, used to say we wouldn't need so much justice if we weren't so broke. And so part of what has to happen is, making sure that minority and women businesses are able to, survive and essentially, I hate to say this, but pay into the system that the court set up. I mean, this decision from a couple of days ago, basically removing all the limits on coordination between candidates and PACs is just going to make it all so much worse. But I think that
I don't think it will. I don't think it will. I think they violated those rules so much. It's going to make legal what they already do.
Right, exactly. But at least we might have had a tool to go complain about it.
If they already do it.
Yeah, no, that is very, very true.
Yeah.
And so, we just have to, kind of adjust to the world as we see it. But I do think that if we can focus on what needs to be done and we stay clear-eyed about our purposes, we will be able to make some progress.
I'm down with that, but we're not at the progress part of our conversation yet.
Well, I try to be positive. Otherwise,
talk about the difference between this Justice Department and every Justice Department, for most of the rest of our lives, when it comes to civil rights.
Right. And we'll go back to the executive orders in a minute, but the DOJ is basically being destroyed. One of the things that we always believed was in what's called the presumption of regularity, that the United States Attorney's Office did not go into federal court and just lie straight up into federal judges' faces. And that's pretty much been destroyed too.
If they came in and lied to federal judges, but federal judges, to their credit, most of them called them on it. I mean, here in Chicago, on the Broadway stage, right? They called them on it, and
they did.
And Boasberg may get his chance in D.C. to have his contempt hearing.
Yes, he's one of my heroes, he's some of the judges I've really stood up, but the DOJ historically, of course, was where we looked to get relief, to push issues forward. And what we have now is a department that's been completely captured by the executive. I mean, Trump is his own sort of unmitigated disaster, but I would have a problem with that if it were Obama. That in fact, there should be some type of wall there between the executive and the lawyers with all of their huge amounts of powers, to ruin people's lives. I mean, so let's take a recent example. This poor Olympian, I guess, who put his finger in the water in the reflecting pool sewage or whatever it is in there now. Well, it's just silly. That's not vandalism, and I doubt that case is going anywhere. But he's had to hire counsel, right? He's now, the fact that I even know who he is, is its own type of stress. And so the DOJ has become a weapon, and they're the ones who came up with weaponize. I kind of hate that word, but in some ways I think it's really accurate. And so, they are reversing decades of civil rights enforcement. The Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department was the leader across the country nationally for decades in enforcing civil rights laws. It's the only other job I would really want would be would be to go run that.
I'm going to take a specific example.
Mhm.
So in lots of cities, including where I live in Chicago, we've had enormously difficult relationships between police and the Black communities in our cities.
Mhm.
And that has led to consent decrees
Yes.
because the policing wasn't constitutional, just wasn't. So we had consent decrees where both sides said, okay, we get it. We have some progress to do. We'll make over time, we'll begin to have policing that is actually legal, that's constitutional, right? Where you actually need evidence. And Chicago and many other cities entered those decrees to help not only bring their police departments into conformity with the law, but to actually make them much more effective.
Right. Yes.
Right, because they're not an occupying army; they are a police force trying to help communities stay safe. That's a very different point of view. Enter this administration.
Yeah.
Those consent decrees are being torn up by the government. Government's telling cities, you must not do what's in those consent decrees. And they like the idea of having an occupying force. They had one here, they had one in Minneapolis of their own. They put a Black Hawk helicopter on a building here. So none of this makes us safer. None of it makes policing more effective. And all of it undermines the effort at justice and at law that we've lived with, that we've been at least trying to. It's been an effort we've been part of, and these guys are part of trying to erase it.
Oh, there's no question about it. And the lack of legal structure, the lack of regularity in the law, the lack of predictability, it's just kind of whatever they want to do that serves Trump's agenda that moment. And then it's not just in the policing. So I'll give you another example that hasn't really gotten much attention, but the Justice Department under President Biden was in the process of negotiating a consent decree with the state of Louisiana about what's called Cancer Alley. So there are these refiners, right, that ring the Gulf of Mexico, and those are all poor Black communities where, cancer rates, all these other problems, physical health issues had been proven using the type of statistical analysis that I've been using in my own work for decades. They were on the verge of a consent decree. Bondi comes in, that's it. So those people are going to be sicker because of this. And I want somebody to tell me why sicker citizens is something we want. How does that fit into both our constitutional heritage as we approach the 4th, but also just from a practical standpoint? Sick people cost money and sick people aren't productive. So they are both ignoring the Constitution, engaging in discrimination, but also, as you say, getting much worse results for everyone.
Yeah. I want to listen for everybody listening. I want to apologize. That terrible sound you hear in the background, if you hear it, is my dog snoring on the floor. So I apologize for if you're.
Well, I kicked mine out. He snores too, along with the cats.
Right, so I think that's the kind of stuff we're seeing from the Justice Department.
Yes.
Sort of the weaponization to go after his enemies, including your old classmate Comey. But this walking away from using the power of government to help Americans in the ways that we've talked about. Talk about some of those executive orders.
Yeah, let's at least highlight a couple of them. They were very busy, the Trump administration, the first week. That was one of the worst weeks of my life because it was just this barrage of executive orders, dismantling civil rights programs, taking away the tools that we've been able to use, going after federal contractors, saying that the Justice Department should identify universities, law firms, corporations that might be engaging in quote unquote illegal DEI. And they have been sort of remarkably effective because, I guess respect where it's earned, they figured out a tool to use. And that is the Federal False Claims Act. They are threatening recipients of federal grant money, which is pretty much every government in the United States of any size, with potential federal False Claims Act criminal exposure for implementing any so-called DEI programs. And one of the most pernicious things, Edwin, about what they do is they don't define anything. So you don't know what it is that might cross their threshold of quote unquote illegal DEI. They don't define DEI. They don't tell you when it's illegal. And many jurisdictions, sadly, caved under that threat. And in all sorts of programs.
They are a little bit clear about it, because I don't believe that, I mean, I could be wrong, but I would doubt this administration has taken up one case of a Black person who was fired or didn't get the job, but they have gone to court to say that white person didn't get the job because of discrimination.
That's right? Exactly right.
Right. Not one case.
Yep.
But plenty the other way. So they have been very clear about at least what they think it means, even if they haven't defined it in law.
Yeah. Well, it's very clear what they're trying to do. I mean, the EEOC, that's another agency that's been completely captured. Now they are very explicit that their focus is going to be discrimination against whites and Christians. And so that they're making it very clear in that way. But as a lawyer, if I'm trying to advise a client and I have no idea what the terms are really supposed to mean, other than, we don't believe in civil rights and, as and everything we've been talking about, it's very difficult to know what to do. One of the things that's most astonishing to me is how quickly the conversation about civil rights in this country got twisted and captured and turned into 3 letters. Remember the first time I ever heard the term DEI, I had to Google it. I was like, what does that mean? And if I don't know what it means, that's a kind of a bad start. And, these are remedial civil rights programs. They aren't DEI, whatever that means. And one of the things that's so astonishing to me is that most of them were started in the Nixon administration.
Yeah.
They were designed to promote what was at the time called Black capitalism. There was a guy, he's passed away now, Arthur Fletcher. It was all in response to the Panthers and the Black Power movement. And I guess the idea was that, well, if we make some Black people rich, maybe they'll sit down and be quiet. But the idea that a civil rights program from Richard Nixon's administration is somehow some type of illegal DEI is so disingenuous and so transparently racist that, as you say, at least we know where they're coming from. But I looked up one day and suddenly everything was DEI, and these programs are not DEI.
Well, I'm right. Yeah. But it's a convenient set of letters for them to make it legal. But the premise of your work, which is that, the playground is tilted. It isn't quite fair for everybody, is also a concept that they say you can't teach in schools. Yes. You can't research. You can't get any data about it if you have a federal grant, right? They just want to order this problem not to exist.
Yes. And telling people that what they see in their own real lives is not true is its own kind of attack. You look around the world and you see that it's not fair, but there's people telling you it is. Well, you might begin to doubt your own perceptions. This attempt to reify and reimpose the idea that everybody is doing just fine. And if you are not, it is an individual problem. I mean, I think, again, one of the other pernicious aspects of this is that by turning everything into an individual problem, people lose their agency to work together. If you think it's just your situation that's happening to you, right, you won't work with other people because you won't see that. And so by taking away the tools that we have to be able to prove that, by teaching children that it's all fine in America and we got past that at some undefined point. So if you see racism, if you see sexism, if you see other kinds of bigotry, it must just be you and your own individual problem. And I think that relieves people of a sense of agency.
So you made 2 points there. One is about agency, and the one before it was if they tell you this enough and it is not what you see yourself, it undermines what you think.
Mm-hmm.
On that point, they have crossed so many lines that I think they have done themselves in. Because it's, after all, he's telling us that the reflecting pool is beautiful. He's telling us there are big crowds at his state fair. Fox News is saying, look at the big crowds behind me, and there's nobody behind me.
There's nobody there.
Nobody there. Right. So I think the blinders are off on the lies. Now the question is, what's the reality we actually see, and do we have the courage to say what it is?
Yes.
Because what they're telling us, roundly, Americans don't believe. Gas prices are down, right? Oh, really? Like, really? I see the sign 4 times on my drive to work. You know what? Right? So there's only so much they can do about that.
This sort of gaslighting. But on a massive scale.
Right. I think that's wearing off. But your other point, which is that it's all, this is all an individual problem. That there are no structures that mediate these things, that working together is a problem, because you cut your own deal. Like the White House has a sign that says, open for business, come cut your deal. And like, I'm sure they're colorblind about that. If you happen to be black, and you happen to live near Mar-a-Lago, right, which would be almost impossible because of the things we're talking about. But you do, and you go in there and you have the right check, you can get the right contract. That undermines this whole notion of, you know what, we should work together for a more fair, more just, and more
perfect union
society for everybody here.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And the idea that all problems are individual means that people don't see that they can work together for group solutions. And to the extent that is undermined, the ability of people to come together, that is an attack that goes across all different kinds of issues. And the Supreme Court, to sort of go back to where the courts are, seems to be, kind of adopting that position on all sorts of things. Look at a case that didn't get as much attention the last couple of weeks, but the attempt to try to hold people responsible for weed killers and poisons and pesticides that hurt hundreds of thousands of people. And so if you lose group remedies to group problems, then the only thing that you're left with is sort of this individual struggle. And especially when it comes to issues of race, that's all about being in a caste, for Isabel Wilkerson's one, I think, the best books ever written, Caste, and talks about that and the ways in which people are separated and frightened and intimidated and pushed down so that they don't band together to say, this is our country too. It belongs to us, not you. It's not for sale to the highest bidder that gives money to Trump and his family and his cronies. And so I think, as we approach this holiday, we really need to be thinking, how do we, take our country back, as as so many of the MAGA, folks keep talking about. But we have to come together and not be distracted by this. Don't use a bad word, by this stuff that keeps people at each other's throats. You and I mentioned you earlier, we were chatting that, there's an old quote from Lyndon Johnson. So, if I'm going back to Nixon and Johnson, that tells you something. That if you can convince the poorest white man that a black man is his problem, he will allow you to pick his pocket and do so gladly. And that really hasn't changed either. So as long as we're all fighting each other, as long as we're distracted by these trivial issues, then we don't turn around and look to see who's up on top of us, because we're too busy fighting each other. And there are all sorts of issues like that. I'm sorry?
Divisions are vast and being created left and right. The Middle East has created enormous divisions in America. It's a long ways away from here. It's terrible what's happening there. It's not the worst slaughter on the planet. Not second or third on that list, but it's the one that is most divisive in the United States.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know how many trans athletes there are in sports, but it is vanishingly small,
Mhm.
and yet we're being told it's a threat to every young woman who wants to play sports. It's just vanishingly small. It's ridiculous. But the need to find enemies and people to blame, is huge. And in America, in the world, my tribe has been blamed for a lot for a long time. And in America,
Mhm.
if you're Black, you have been what these guys have been said. Well, you have to be afraid, or they're getting stuff that doesn't belong to them. Last I checked, you don't get anything unless you work twice as hard for it. So
Yes, to get half as far is certainly what my parents,
well, just tell me time
told
out here for
me.
1 second. Your parents were some of the greatest people I ever knew.
Oh, you're so sweet.
Honestly, and your dad, so inspiring for me as a young kid. I just,
Well, and I have his poster on my wall here. My father ran for alderman in Chicago in 1963,
yeah.
and his slogan was representation, not exploitation. Well, we could have thrown that one up, this morning, right? So
Yeah,
it's not so different. And but to talk about my parents for just a second, I find them and my other ancestors to be a source of strength. So this past weekend, not this immediate one, but one before, we went to my family reunion in South Carolina. And one of the interesting things about slavery in South Carolina was that it had the highest death rate of slaves, because right around 1800, 1810 up to 1820, rice was the main crop. And you have to stand in water to harvest rice. And so there were, death rates. 80% of slaves would die in some plantations. And so I look at those folks and what they endured, and I think, well, who am I to not keep going? Who am I not to take strength from that? So one thing I learned, which is that my mother's father, the Reverend Dr. Andrew Alexander Sims, was a leader in the anti-lynching movement in South Carolina in the early 1900s. It's a wonder he didn't get lynched himself. And so if they could do it, we could do it. But to go back to the point about how structural it is, in Anderson, South Carolina, right in front of the courthouse, is this great big Confederate monument to the Confederate States of America, right in front of the courthouse. So just in case you weren't clear about the message about who was supposed to get justice here, who had a right to be here, they put that right in your face. And the plaque is really interesting because it talks about the lost cause, but how we have now righted things, and things are as they are supposed to be. So when you see that, and there's someone like Justice Roberts or other justices saying, that's all over with. Well, I mean, that is a visual manifestation of how not over it we all are.
There was a Confederate flag at the Great American State Fair this week.
Yes.
It managed on January 6th to get into the Congress. And these are not, innocent symbols. They are not innocent symbols.
No, they are not. And the ways in which people are intimidated and told that they have no rights are myriad. It's court decisions, it's monuments, it's, what programs get funded. To go to your point about people being distracted, trans athletes. Well, I don't know about other school districts, but the school district here in San Antonio, where I live, is now going back to charging students for breakfast and lunch because of the cuts in the great, big, beautiful bill. Well, are you worried about trans athletes, or do you want children to be fed? That seems to me just about the most basic thing there is to do is feed the children. So
you don't learn if you're hungry.
Yeah.
You just don't learn if you're hungry. So
no, you can't. And so, why aren't we talking about that? And worrying about that?
We got a lot to talk about. I just want to go back before we end here, because I want the big audience to understand that none of what you do has ever taken a single opportunity away from anybody, right? In fact, arguably, it's made every taxpayer better off because of the competition, right? I mean, I just don't, the lies that have been told about your work and what it does are legion.
But I'll give you a live example. I actually am the expert witness for Harris County, Texas, which is Houston. Their minority business program has been sued. And the plaintiff was, I think, quite candid about the fact that he doesn't like the program because he's going to lose business, and he's had the business for 20 years. Well, can we stop and think about that for a second? You've had the contract to do landscaping for 20 years. Might there be some people who could give a more competitive price, maybe do a better job, better use of tax dollars? And so this myth that somehow these programs are taking jobs away from qualified white contractors is just nonsense. Another one of my father's favorite sayings was, everybody loves capitalism till it bites them in the butt. And, we go, yes, free and open markets, but let me get mine. And so these programs are really designed to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to compete on a fair basis. We're native Chicagoans, and I'm still so incredibly homesick all the time. And we always knew that the fix was in, that patronage was what drove contracting, what drove jobs. And so it meant that all communities couldn't participate. And, it also means that sometimes maybe the best people didn't get the job.
Okay, but before everybody who doesn't live in Chicago hears this from Colette, that's the world we grew up in, and it changed.
It did change, yes.
It changed the part. I was in the city council, and Colette here was helping the city figure out how to change it. I mean, we did make changes so that there are plenty of white contractors in the city of Chicago. God knows. Yes. But what we have is a system where more people have the opportunity to bid. More people know what they can bid on. It's not a secret anymore. And everybody's bid has to be considered. I mean, it's a different.
It is. That's really so true. And for non-Chicagoans, the myth of the Chicago machine still is out there. And there hasn't been much of a machine in a while.
The machine is broken.
Yeah. It's so. There are many other places that are probably much worse now than the city of Chicago is. But it took concerted action by people who insisted on change. It just didn't happen, fall out of the sky. There were lawsuits, the Shackman Decree, right?
It took coalition building. It took people who cared about civil rights, people who cared about abortion, people who cared about
women's rights, right?
People cared about women's rights, people who cared about curbs you could go over in a wheelchair. It took all of these people working together, right? Not to say my interest is the only interest that matters, but our interests together have power.
Yeah.
So with that,
idea that we come together.
Talk about because we only got a couple more minutes left. Talk about the fight in front of us.
Yeah, and I think to not be discouraging to people, the federal courts are their own problem. One thing that I'm really pushing for, and I think that there's going to be some motion on this, is actually just expand the number of judges, which we need to do anyway.
Are you just talking about the
federal dockets are so clogged?
So you're not talking about the Supreme Court. You're talking about the whole federal system.
The whole federal court system. Because remember, the court has only taken 670 cases a year now, which is about half of what it was when I started to practice law 40 years ago. We need more judges, period, so that people can get some relief. And yes, expand the Supreme Court. Those are not constitutional issues. Congress decides how many there are and how many judges there are. So that's something I think we can do. One thing I do want to highlight is not ignoring the fights in the states and for state offices, because the states are going to be, I think, a bulwark against a lot of this Trump administration nonsense or tax or retrenchment.
And they have been. California has been. Illinois has been.
Illinois is great.
But we learned from the southern states
Mhm.
that built their own resistance to the federal government when the federal government was on the side of civil rights.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, your governor in Texas is perfectly happy, and at the time, his friend Ken Paxton winning that job, perfectly happy not to follow the law if they didn't like it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But people working together. I think that Tallarico down here has a real shot at beating Ken Paxton.
Don't come back to Illinois until after you've cast that vote.
Well, yeah, exactly. And this is my plea to people who are in other states, which is find races outside of your own state that you can support if you think you don't need to do it at home. Obviously, vote. But Illinois, you got this. We're not worried about you. What we're worried about Texas. We're worried about North Carolina. Even states like Iowa in play, or even Minnesota. So I'm going to give a plug here for my law school classmate, Amy Klobuchar, who's running for governor in what is a tighter race, I think, than people appreciate. That these are going to be the folks who are going to stand up. So it's vote, it's organize, it's hold one another up when we get discouraged. So I always like reading you. I do everything that you post because you do still see the light. You do still see the ideals.
I love the American people. And you know what? We bump into each other. We learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We do not hate each other the way they pretend we do. And when we go out and talk to anybody, they're more thoughtful than the media gives them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to throw these terrible people out of office.
Yes. We just gotta hang on, and keep moving. I think about my grandparents. I think about my father. Was a Tuskegee Airman. We know that story, but they kept on. They kept their faith. And I asked him once, Daddy, why did you go to war to fight for this country?
Mm-hmm.
When you couldn't use a public toilet in Nashville where you grew up? And he said, because I saw what it could be. I had the vision and I was willing to die for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a separate conversation. I don't want to start at the end of this, but it wasn't because Thomas Jefferson wrote those beautiful words that we love our freedom. It was because people didn't have it and had to fight for it for all this time that made it part of our DNA. It's that battle for hundreds of years that sunk it into our soul. Because every country that's ever thrown off an empire to be independent has given something like the same words, but it hasn't mattered to them. It mattered to us this way because of the fight, not because of the words, but because of the fight.
And the willingness of people to come together and fight for others. So it isn't just my. I mean, the selfishness of the administration and their ideology is really kind of breathtaking, especially for people who call themselves Christians.
You mean that's not in the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt take.
That they're going to make kids in Texas read the Bible. Yeah, but what portion are you reading? How about that Sermon on the Mount? Could we start there?
Yeah, right. There is that little thing. Wait, those people will inherit the earth? Are you kidding me? Where's their 747?
Right. Suffer the little children to come unto me. So we just got to keep it going. We'll continue to fight for the programs that I work on. It is a piece of the civil rights struggle that doesn't get that much attention. When people say, what do you do? I say, I'm a civil rights lawyer who works on business issues. Yeah. That usually kind of puzzles people. What does that mean? But it is important.
Enormously important.
What you're doing and having these conversations and finding alternative ways for people to get information, I think is just critical now, with everything else that's going on.
All right. Well, Colette, we've run out of time.
We have. All right. Well, thank you, Edwin.
Always great to talk to you. And I'm glad on this 4th of July, people got to hear this story. It's so much a part of America's story. We ought to celebrate it.
I totally agree. And thank you all for having me. Happy to come back again. And happy 4th of July to everyone. It's our country, too.
All right.
All right. Thank you, my friend. See you soon. Bye.